This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Hello, everybody. Today, we are talking about ADHD with Cindy Goldrich, who is the author of 2 books, 8 Keys to Parenting Children with ADHD, and she co-authored her second book, ADHD Executive Functioning Behavioral Challenges in the Classroom, with her daughter, who is a resource specialist. And I'm so excited to have her share her expertise about ADHD today, because approximately 60 to 70% of people with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia also have ADHD. And about 80 to 90% of our students have ADHD. So it's a very important topic to talk about and important for parents to learn more so that they can help and be patient with their children. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's just jump right in and tell us what has led you to become an ADHD expert.
Sure. Well, I'm a mental health counselor by training, and I found that in working with the kids and the parents who have ADHD and executive function challenges, it wasn't really enough. So many therapists do not get training specifically in ADHD and executive function. So I found that the best training for that was really through the coaching world. There are schools that specialize in ADHD executive function challenges. So I got trained as a coach, but then I found that, you know what? Nobody was really looking at the parents. So I developed my own program combining everything I knew from the mental health world and the coaching world and ADHD. And I developed my own parent coach training program where I train professionals, but I also coach parents as well.
It's like the best of all worlds.
It really is. It really combined just everything that I have found is so necessary in working with these kids. Because I always say, and you know this, when parents don't know what parents don't know, as much as they're trying to help their kids, they sometimes unintentionally are not helping as much as they thought, or even creating some of the stressors. So
Absolutely.
we work to reduce that.
Yes. I definitely, as a parent of kids with neurodiversities, understand, because I wish I knew what I know now when I was raising my kids, so that I could have done some things differently.
Yeah, I get it. But you know what? The good news is, I believe, and I've seen, it's never really too late, in that they're still your kids, and you can build in the relationship, you can help them work on the skills, or you can help them get to the point where they are ready for their own coach, right? So once they hit high school or college, or they're adults who have ADHD, they can have their own coaching. Younger than that, I really think it's, the parents have to be primary in that setting.
Much like how parents need to be the advocates for their children until they can prepare them to advocate for themselves as high schoolers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing I always say about advocacy is a developmental skill. Whether someone's 5 or 15 or 25 or our older age, whatever age that is, not everybody is comfortable saying, I don't understand this, or the seat I'm sitting in, I'm getting very distracted, or the kid who's thinking, I can't go to the teacher for extra help because I don't even know what question to ask. So sometimes we all need support in our advocacy skills, especially younger kids. We need to really help them develop those skills.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So tell us, how does your teacher training work?
So several years ago, probably about 10 or more years ago, I was already coaching the kids, and then I had started the parent coaching. And what happened was the parents would say, wow, this is great. I really understand my child. They'd go into the school, they'd advocate for their child. And they found that the teachers didn't know what the teachers didn't know.
If you like this video, press the like button and subscribe now. The more people who subscribe and like, the more we will show up on YouTube for other people to learn more about dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia.
Because just like with therapists, it's not in teachers' training to really understand ADHD and executive function. A lot of schools are doing a better job in bringing in people like me to train their staff, but it's not necessarily part of their training. So I started traveling the country. I still do to this day, going into school districts and working with the teachers and the staff, the school psychologists and everyone in the staff to understand and work with these kids. Well, so then several years ago, people said, this is so necessary. This is the missing piece. I want to be able to train my local teachers, or I'd have school psychologists who say, hey, you know what? I've got new teachers all the time. I need to have the skills of training these teachers. So that's when I started my ADHD Teacher Training Academy. So now I have the Parent Coach Academy where people learn to become parent coaches, and the Teacher Training Academy where people learn to become teacher trainers.
Great.
Yeah.
So is it available on Zoom or via recordings as well as in person?
So I go into school districts and I will do full day trainings, sometimes multiple day trainings. But in terms of training the trainer, that's an online interactive live class that I run via Zoom, just like I do for the Parent Coach Academy. But the other thing that I do now, which is great, is teachers can come to me directly to learn, if their school, let's say, isn't bringing someone in, and they can all earn CEUs directly with me. As also occupational therapists can, anyone that needs from counseling, NBCC can, they can get CEUs directly from me. And in a few weeks, hopefully I should have certification ability from ASHA, which is speech language pathologists. So they'll all be able to get continuing credits by taking classes directly from me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So did you have to do extra training in order to be able to provide accreditation for?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They as they should, they have rigorous programs before they're going to be able to allow someone else to give CEUs. So
that's wonderful. So would you give us some tips for parents on how to help their child when they come home from school?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest tip I have, and it's funny because I do a presentation for parents. I go into schools and whatnot called Top 10 Strategies for Parenting Children and Teens with ADHD, which is basically a presentation, which I'm going to share some of this with you, where I really want to just give some of the essentials and leave space for parents to ask their questions. Because one of the biggest things I think that's important is understanding the social and emotional impact of ADHD and executive function on learning, on motivation, on behavior. So my number one strategy is get fully educated. People stop at, oh, it's inattentive, it's hyperactive, it's impulsive, right? But they need to understand what lies beneath that. My workshop series, my CalmConnected workshop series that I do directly for parents, I spend 2 hours doing a full education on that. But the basics I want to make sure your audience understands is that if you've got challenges with ADHD, by definition, you're going to have executive function challenges. We now know that this is a challenge of the prefrontal cortex. So a lot of times, years ago, parents would call me up and say, my kid has ADHD and he has executive function challenges. And I'd be like, yes, of course, because they do go hand in hand. And you know that from your work as well, right?
Right, exactly.
It's so important that they understand really the full scope of their child. I'll give you one more example with something like working memory, which is a huge issue for people with ADHD. It's one of the executive function skills that we always talk about. If I say, hey, Johnny, do me a favor, go upstairs, get your backpack, your shoes, your tennis racket. On the way down, could you get my water bottle? See if I shut my light off. And kid comes down, if they come down, with maybe one or two things, right? And so what's the emotion that the parent is feeling right now? Frustrated, angry, exhausted. Why can't he do this? Why didn't he do this? If he wanted it, if it was a matter of getting the stuff that he wanted for himself, he probably, right? So what we realize is, well, now that we recognize that working memory is actually a construct that your child may be weaker in, then what do? We go into problem solving mode. And then it becomes much easier, and it also becomes less emotional, right? I recognize that, maybe I need to break it down into smaller, chunks, or give them visual supports or mnemonic devices, or a whole host of things I can teach you. But first you need to recognize that the kid's not trying to just be difficult. It truly is a challenge for him. And it has nothing to do with his intelligence. He may have the highest IQ in his whole grade and the weakest executive function skills, right? Mm-hmm. The weakest working memory.
Yeah, that's one of the things parents need to understand, is that their child is not trying to be vindictive or difficult. None of us want to be difficult. Like, that's not children's goal in life. They want to make their parents happy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so heartbreaking, because these are good parents who are trying their hardest. They just are missing some of the knowledge that they need to have.
Yeah. So, what other things do you feel it's important for our listeners to understand about?
I think it's also important for parents to understand that how they talk to their kids can make or break. And again, I'm not saying that these are mean, bad parents. It's not just being patient and having a certain tone. It's the conversations that we set up. It's the, how we can collaborate with them, how we can, get our kids to talk. Because so many parents say to me, well, my kid won't talk. He won't tell me why X, Y, and Z. So these are the skills that we work on, but this is essential. We can help kids develop these skills, right?
Yeah. So during your training, do you teach parents and teachers what to say?
It's not even a matter of what to say. It's more nuanced than that, because, first of all, my philosophy is parent the child you have, right? Not the child you thought you'd have, not the child you wish you'd have, not the child you'd have if your mother-in-law got her way, but that child you're blessed with. And every child is so unique. So what I do with parents is I don't tell them, okay, this is the script, this is what you do, because by now you can find that on Google, right? You could Google, like, how do I get my kid to pay attention? We have to understand how to dance in the moment, how to be flexible with our kid, so that I don't want to give them just the words, the script, but I want to help them understand and have a process so that they can be flexible in the moment. If what they're doing isn't quite working, they'll start to recognize, because of this, this, and this, right? Parenting's complex. Even if you've got, typical kids, I don't know too many people have all typical kids, right? We don't always know, am I enabling, am I supporting? What kind of boundaries can I set that aren't going to just be triggering and they're actually going to build skills? And what kind of consequences are going to build those skills and not just feel punitive? So we need to really look at how we communicate, what kind of boundaries we set, what kind of consequences we do. And by the way, I always tell parents, of my 7 sessions of CalmConnected, we don't even talk about consequences until session 6. There's so much we can do before we worry about that, right? But we need to shift our parenting.
And do you find that many of the parents that you work with also have ADHD and perhaps don't realize it about themselves?
Absolutely. In fact, it's very funny you say that, because after working with me or after the first session of my workshop, many parents will say, huh, you know what? Now I understand my childhood differently. I think this might be, even though I'm managing, I'm successful in my career and all this other stuff, maybe that's what's been going on, especially, by the way, for women. Because traditionally, we used to think that it was the boys and the girls that had ADHD, right? It was more boys and girls. We now know it's not quite as different in terms of the rate, but it shows up so differently. So girls and women tend to present with anxiety or depression, and that's what their diagnosis is. Whereas if we really did a good diagnostic workup, we would see that ADHD may be a part of this, and that if we start to manage the ADHD, the anxiety and the depression would lessen.
That's interesting. I never knew that that's typically how they diagnose females.
Yeah.
I I I definitely have ADHD, and I have more masculine characteristics, I suppose. So for me, it didn't ever present itself as depression.
Right.
It definitely got me in trouble in school, where most girls knew how to suppress it perhaps better than myself.
Mhm. Exactly. And it wasn't just that they intentionally were suppressing it. It was just, they were more maybe the inattentive type. And the girls that were sitting in the back of the class just twirling their hair and goody two shoes. But remember, ADHD has nothing to do with intelligence. You could have the highest, intelligence in the class. So it's not, it's not like we saw that the grades were poor, right? But then again, they hit the wall and they didn't reach their potential. And that's a lot what happens. 9.4% of school-age children have diagnosable ADHD, and it's highly hereditary. So back to your question, yeah, up to 40 to 50% of people with ADHD are going to have one or the other parent has ADHD. So very often I'm dealing with the parents with their own ADHD.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I assumed, because with my program, dyslexia is hereditary. So very
Right.
often, the parents don't realize that they have it either, because they're very functional.
Mm-hmm.
But, then when they go through the list of questions for their children, they see so many of those characteristics in themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So what's the best way for people to learn about your program, or to to sign up for it or
Sure.
participate?
Well, first of all, my email address, and I'm always happy to answer questions. And in fact, I do have a newsletter that I send out every few weeks with tips and tools and strategies for parents, for students, for educators, for professionals. So if you email me, I'm happy to, include you on that. My email address is cindy@ptscoaching.com. Stands for Pathways to Success. So PTS, because I believe their path is like this, right? It's not a straight line. So CINDY@ptscoaching.com. My website, which obviously is ptscoaching.com, has tons of resources. I have an extensive blog. I've got tons of free videos you can watch. It also will have information for professionals and for parents to register for my my workshops and my trainings.
And do you have a workshop coming in?
I always have workshops coming up. I don't remember the dates, but the information's right on my website. I also do, as I mentioned, go into school districts. So if your school or a school that is interested in having some professional level training, I can go into the school and do full day trainings as well. And then the other thing is my books. I always look at those for resources.
And can parents typically request for their school to hire you for classes?
Yeah, I mean, different schools fund themselves differently. Private schools, the parents may be able to get together and bring me in or help with the school bringing it in. A lot of times parents know more in terms of the resources out there than the schools do. So very often the parent will raise the awareness of the school and say, hey, there's an expert out there. Can you bring them in?
And do you find that there's a less amount of shame around ADHD than there was 20 years ago?
Yes, yes. And no. Yes, there is in many places less shame. In certain communities, there is still the same shame. Also, I do this worldwide, so I'm dealing with, with people in all different countries across the world. And there's still, unfortunately, a fair amount of shame because when people don't understand and believe that this is a true neurobiological condition, poor parenting cannot and does not cause ADHD, right? It's part of the neurobiology, but we're getting better.
So you said poor parenting does not cause it, but poor parenting can contribute to.
It can exacerbate it. It can exacerbate it because if we don't understand, like the example I gave with working memory, right? If we don't recognize it, then we're already, come on, Johnny, why don't you listen to me? Whereas when we recognize it, our interaction, our whole family system changes. So the opportunity is always there for improvement.
Yeah, like an example is there's a lot of shame around dyslexia. And in my house, because this is my profession, there is no shame around it. So, we very freely talk about our struggles with reading or spelling or how we messed something up and it was embarrassing or whatever. But, some households, the kids don't want to share it. The parents don't want to hear about it. And so see how it is the same type of situation with ADHD as well.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so valuable that you're doing what you're doing and, shedding the light. So that's great.
So is there anything else you would like to share before we go our separate ways?
Yeah, you know what? If people do reach out to me, I'm happy to send them. Just let me know, that you just listened to this podcast, and I'm happy to send them the introductory chapter to my book, 8 Keys to Parenting Children with ADHD. And I can also send them a coupon for 10% off my CalmConnected workshop series. So I'm happy to offer that.
And yeah, it was great having you on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.